Often, sects are ridiculous and bizarre. If they pose a danger, it is mostly only to the sect members themselves and their relatives. But there are also such religious organizations that pose a deadly danger to people who are not affiliated with them. Today, we will talk about one such Japanese sect, whose members in 1995 attacked the Tokyo subway using poison gas, killing people. They committed this crime on the orders of their teacher, a half-blind guru named Shoko Asahara, who proclaimed himself a god, or rather many gods at the same time. Members of this sect bought weapons from Russia, developed explosives, deadly viruses, and gases. They were gathering an army of religious fanatics to bring about the end of the world. In addition, they drank tea from the hair of their guru. This video presents 10 interesting facts about the Aum Shinrikyo sect. Almost always, the history of a sect should begin with the life story of its founder. In this case, we will do so. Shoko Asahara was born in 1955 in Japan in a very large family. I will say at once that at birth his name was Teiho Matsumoto, and the name under which he became known, Shoko Asahara. He took it later when he became a religious leader. But to avoid confusing you with the multitude of Japanese names, I'm going to call him Shoko Asahara at the beginning. Is that okay with you? So he was born with a major health problem. He was blind in one eye completely, and his other eye just couldn't see very well. He had to go to a school for blind children. Interestingly, Asahara was a very big guy and he played sports. He had a violent tendency from childhood, and so he bullied his classmates during his school years, which is now called bullying. Another thing is that all the kids in his school were completely blind, while Asahara himself was blind in only one eye, and his other eye, though it saw very poorly, but still his vision was his advantage over the other students. He also managed to earn money as a guide for his classmates. He earned a lot of money, about $3,000. If you translate it into modern money with inflation, it will be about $2,000. Not bad for a half-blind schoolboy. Also during his studies, he distinguished himself by his incredible intelligence, as well as his talent as an orator and demagogue. He argued with teachers on clever topics and charmed other students with his charisma. Many people wanted to be friends with him, while those who did not want to be friends with him had problems. Because of his charisma, Asahara turned other students against those he didn't like. We poisoned them afterward. After graduating from high school, Asahara tried to enter medical university, but he was not accepted. Then he decided to start studying acupuncture on his own, a pseudo-scientific method of treatment where thin needles are poked into a person's body. Allegedly, this helps to properly adjust the flow of internal energy, thanks to which you can cure people of diseases. Asahara opened his reception room, where he practiced acupuncture, and he also traded various magical preparations and potions. These preparations, he said, were energized with the energy of an enlightened person and had a healing effect. In other words, he was essentially just practicing quackery. At one point, he was even prosecuted for quackery because he was selling magic potions and deceiving the people. After that, Asahara decided that he needed to play big and create his own religion. Japan in the mid-1980s was already in the top 3 countries with the highest GDP per capita. Even the average Japanese had quite a lot of money. After the war, the Japanese became less and less religious. And so there was a kind of spiritual vacuum in the country at the end of the 20th century. There were many wealthy Japanese seeking spirituality. This was readily exploited by numerous gurus who created their own sects. One of these gurus was Shoko Asahara. He himself at first joined the religious organization Aum Shinrikyo, which was popular in Japan at that time, but then he decided to start his own sect, as he saw how much members of such organizations blindly follow their guru and do whatever he thinks at that moment. Asahara was married and had a child, but he told his wife that he had a spiritual crisis and urgently needed to go to India to achieve the stamp of enlightenment. He ended up going, leaving his wife and child behind. There he studied various ancient Indian texts for 2 years and also found a spiritual guru. The guru said of Asahara that it would take decades of meditation to achieve enlightenment. Asahara started meditating, and after 6 days he came back to his guru and said that he had managed to do it in just 6 days. He thanked him and went back to Japan. Now, in Asahara's own opinion, he was fully prepared to become a religious teacher himself for people who were hungry for spirituality. He formed an organization called Aum Shinrikyo, which translates to higher truth, and changed his real name to Shoko Asahara. He began dressing in brightly colored clothes and handing out flyers with his teachings near Tokyo subway stations. As I said at the beginning, Asahara was a very charismatic person and a talented speaker. He quickly managed to find the first followers, who gladly joined his organization and began to be interested in his teachings. And Asahara intentionally attracted to his organization not all in a row, but only representatives of the middle class and wealthy people. He did not need the poor. Thanks to wealthy people, Asahara finally gained access to connections and money, the things he had always sought. What did the members of the Aum Shinrikyo sect believe in? What was the essence of this doctrine? I will try to tell you briefly. This doctrine is a mixture of many religions and philosophical ideas, mainly Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Christianity, Tantrism, and even the predictions of Nostradamus. All of these are compiled from the authored thoughts of Asahara himself, who considered his teachings to be the form and synthesis of all the world's religions. According to Asahara's teachings, he is Buddha and Jesus Christ at the same time. His claim is that he was sent by the god Shiva to Earth to build the perfect world of Shambhala on it. Asahara is also called to take away the sins of all people living on Earth and give them the true teachings, the teachings of Aum Shinrikyo. It is also claimed that Asahara, in his past incarnations on Earth, built the Egyptian pyramids and was the founder of civilization in principle. That is, the one who transformed people from savages living in small communities into a fully developed civilization with culture and writing. The doctrine says that Armageddon will soon come, that is, the Third World War will happen, which will be started by the USA having attacked Japan. All to blame, of course, the Jews and the Freemasons. A classic. Only members of the Aum Shinrikyo sect will be able to save themselves during the end of the world. In this case, the followers of the sect should be engaged in bringing the end of the world closer, so that it happens as early as possible. The logic is that most people in the world are not members of Aum Shinrikyo, so they are sinners and will be held accountable. But if the end of the world happens as early as possible, then all these people will have less opportunity and time to sin, and therefore accumulate less negative karma. Thus, the members of the sect considered themselves the saviors of the world, who bring the end of the world closer for the benefit of all people. Members of the sect devoted much time to prayer as well as rigorous physical training. Asahara himself was highly trained and practiced Zen and other martial arts in which he achieved considerable success. As a visually impaired man, he made his students immerse themselves in very hot, almost boiling water as well as ice water for relatively long periods of time while reciting prayers. All this was done to train willpower and fight against harmful desires. The sect members also spent long periods of time in underground bunkers where they recited prayers and prepared for life during a nuclear war. All of these trials were severe, but at one point they became deadly. One of Asahara's disciples died from immersion in hot water, which became a scandal. A certain number of sect members immediately left the sect. However, Asahara found a way out of the situation and added to his doctrine. He said that any death of a person who died with the help of the Aum Shinrikyo sect was a blessing, because having died at the hands of the members of this organization, a person cleanses his karma. Asahara assured his followers that deaths during the practices, as well as murders committed by members of the sect, should not be seen as murder or something bad, but should be seen as the salvation of those people. This doctrine became the basis for all subsequent terrorist attacks carried out by the sect, which we will discuss later. The sect had a structure similar to the Japanese government, with a minister of education, a minister of health, a minister of finance, a minister of defense, and so on. All of them reported to Asahara personally. The sect also conducted a large number of different supposedly medical experiments on people, which included taking psychoactive and hallucinogenic substances. Sectarians used LSD for the first time in their lives during their prayers, together with Asahara. In doing so, they were told that all the sensations they were experiencing under the influence of this substance were actually due to being around Asahara. These were very intense and unusual sensations. So many people really believed that Asahara had supernatural powers. Sect members circulated a photo of the teacher supposedly hanging in the air in a lotus pose. Many piously believed the photo to be authentic. In fact, this photo was taken as follows. Asahara sat in lotus pose, and because he was a physically developed man, jumped into the air, pushing off with his knees. It was at this point that the picture was taken. His face shows how tense he is because jumping in this pose on his knees is really hard. Asahara was considered a god in the sect, and this belief was very well converted into money. The sect members sold Asahara's blood in order to drink it and be energized by their teacher. Good thing it was only blood and not any of his other fluids. Also sold in small vials was the water from the bathtub he washed in. Also, hair from Asahara's beard and head was sold to the disciples, and they made tea from it and drank it. Also, the most devoted and wealthy students were offered to rent a special helmet with electrodes on the head for $10,000 a month. This helmet supposedly allowed them to connect to Asahara's mind and receive divine energy directly from the teacher. His disciples walked the streets like this, and the sectarians believed that their own minds were an extension of Asahara's mind, and therefore he was always aware of what they were thinking. For this reason, the disciples were afraid to break his commandments, for they were sure that the teacher would know about any of their thoughts. The sect members worshipped Asahara as a god, and for each new level reached in the sect, a portrait of the teacher was given out with a small card at the beginning, and then this portrait became bigger and bigger. Then, a huge poster with his picture was given out to hang on the wall. Sect members would walk around Tokyo wearing masks with Asahara's face on them, thus luring people to join the organization. They also danced in such masks at their festivals. There were many restrictions in the sect. For example, it was forbidden to eat a lot, as it was harmful to spiritual development. However, Asahara himself willingly violated these prohibitions. He had a personal driver who asked him why he violated the prohibitions of his religion. Asahara quickly found something to answer, and thus said that he was testing the strength of his driver's faith. He wanted to see how the driver would behave if he saw Asahara breaking the prohibitions, like whether the driver would be able to keep his faith and loyalty, whether he would doubt him. So, ostensibly, Asahara was gorging himself for the benefit of his driver. When Sahara gained a few dozen extra pounds, his assistant asked him why ordinary sect members should starve themselves, while Asahara fattens and fattens. Asahara found something to answer and said that his fat is special because it contains all the negative karma that he takes from his disciples by touching them. And his fat has nothing to do with excessive food intake. There were more members of the sect in Russia than in Japan itself, about 30,000. Asahara opened offices in Russia soon after the sect was founded in his homeland. Moreover, Asahara even came to Moscow and visited the Red Square. But the main purpose of his visit was weapons. He tried to buy even an atomic bomb in Russia and hire military specialists to train his soldiers. He even managed to buy an old Soviet military helicopter for $1 million, which he was going to use to spray sarin gas from the air over Japanese cities to bring the apocalypse closer. Spiritually starved former Soviet citizens eagerly joined his sect in search of enlightenment and solutions to their spiritual problems. 6 training centers of this sect were opened in Moscow, and they also launched their own radio station with round-the-clock broadcasting. At the stadium Olympiyskiy, they periodically held mass initiations of new members, as well as sessions of group and dance meditation, which were attended by thousands of people. In general, the sect was doing even better in Russia than in its native Japan. At one point, Asahara decided to run for the Japanese government. He was confident of his victory, for his students thought he was a god. He began his campaign through the streets of Japanese cities, and his students in white suits campaigned to vote for him in the election. But most Japanese people saw it as a mere circus. When election day came, Asahara suffered a crushing defeat. With an incredibly small number of votes, even fewer people voted for him than were in his own sect. He became a laughingstock and was actively ridiculed on Japanese television. It was then that he vowed to take revenge on the people of the country for this humiliation and directed all the resources of his sect to weapons development, military training, and preparation for terrorist attacks. His scientists even tried to develop a dirty homemade nuclear bomb, which they planned to detonate in the center of Tokyo. Fortunately, they failed. There were many scientists in the sect who were developing bacteriological weapons and war gases for the sect's needs. The sect wanted to use bacteriological weapons at first, but they found them too difficult to make. So they switched to creating sarin gas, which was used by the Nazis in the death camps. The sectarians carried out several attacks, spraying the gas from vans in certain areas of Tokyo in an attempt to kill their critics. Some of these attacks were successful, and the targets were eliminated. Asahara, police later found out, even wrote poems dedicated to sarin gas, praising it as if it were a living person. Asahara also gassed his own students, who complained of health problems and malaise afterward. Asahara explained to them that they were being poisoned by agents of the CIA and Japanese intelligence agencies. In this way, he gave his disciples the feeling that they were in a ring of enemies. In Japan, the sect had several chemical weapons laboratories that were disguised as temples, which is why suspicion did not come there. One day, locals complained of foul chemical odors, and the police arrived there. They found war gas in the air samples, but the sect members claimed that their temples had been gassed, and they themselves were victims of a gas attack. Unfortunately, the police believed these claims and did not press charges against the sect members. The sectarians also used gas to kill dozens of their own co-religionists who expressed doubts about Asahara's teachings. Their bodies were then burned in giant industrial microwave incinerators. Their bones and teeth were then crushed into dust, and this dust was scattered in the forest. On one occasion, the police even sent an agent to infiltrate the sect. However, he was quickly exposed and killed by gas, and his body was burned. The police had no evidence of the sect's involvement in the murder of the policeman, as all evidence was destroyed. Sect members also sprayed high-rises in Tokyo twice with anthrax in hopes of infecting the entire city with it. However, these attacks were unsuccessful because their anthrax was incapable of infecting people. In general, Aum Shinrikyo sectarians conducted many such attacks, but most of them failed to achieve their goals. The most famous sectarian crime was the 1995 Tokyo subway attack. On the appointed day and time, a few of the most dedicated sectarians descended into the subway with umbrellas and paper wrappers containing sarin gas in liquid form packed in plastic bags. All this took place during rush hour, when the subway was at its maximum capacity. The sectarians entered the subway cars on different branches, sat down quietly, and drove off. While the carriages were moving, they threw the bags on the floor and then pierced them with the tips of the umbrella. Thereafter, they left these carriages. The gas gradually began to escape from the packets and poisoned the unsuspecting people. People began to complain of feeling sick, dizzy, and nauseous. The gas cars continued to move, spreading the gas around the stations after 10-15 minutes. The subway authorities were informed of the situation and did not yet understand what was happening. The trains on these branches were stopped. In some of the cars, there were people who found the packages and they threw the packages out of the cars. Some of these daredevils died after a few minutes. After that, thousands of people inhaled this gas. The attacked subway branches turned into something like a battlefield. People were writhing in pain and screaming, and panic set in. People began to leave the subway, but despite the fact that the attack was carried out in a very crowded place, only 12 people died. Every person's death is a tragedy, but such small casualties were because the gas created by the sectarians was not concentrated enough. However, thousands of people, though they survived, suffered lifelong health problems, and many became disabled. It became the largest terrorist attack carried out within Japan. However, such results were clearly unsatisfactory for the sect's leadership. Interestingly, for the first weeks, the police in Japan did not link this terrorist attack to the activities of Aum Shinrikyo, as they had no evidence. But after a while, one of the high-ranking members of the sect repented, came to the police, and told them everything. This was the beginning of the end of Aum Shinrikyo. The police began arresting members of the sect one by one. Asahara himself went into hiding for a long time, and it was not known where he was. But after some time, Japanese special forces broke into one of the temples of the organization and found Asahara inside a small room in the wall. He was sitting there, encased in hundreds of thousands of paper dollars, and in doing so, he was sitting in his own urine. Clearly spent a very long time in that closet. When he was told what he was being arrested for, he replied, "Do you think a blind man like me is capable of doing that?" What followed was the longest criminal trial in Japanese history. Asahara himself tried to feign mental illness during the trial. He mumbled indistinctly and behaved inadequately, denying all charges. When his own daughter came to him, he undressed and started masturbating in front of her to kill everyone that he was crazy. However, the forensic doctors were not convinced and they declared him sane. In 1999, 4 years after the terrorist attack, he was sentenced to death by hanging. In Japan, as in many other countries, those sentenced to death often wait decades for execution. Such was the case with Sugar. After his sentencing, he stopped talking to anyone. He stopped eating and washing himself. He went under himself. He was dressed in diapers, washed and force-fed. He turned into a vegetable. He never went out to see his relatives either, and he lived in this state for almost 20 years. Only recently, in 2018, he was executed. On this day, several other members of the sect who were involved in the terrorist attack were also executed. This is how Asahara's life ended. Once a god surrounded by love and reverence, he ended his life on the gallows in diapers. Interestingly, when Asahara was sentenced to death, a group of devoted Russian followers tried to free him. They made explosives and purchased weapons that were shipped across Russia to Japan. The group of several men planned to stage a terrorist attack and issue an ultimatum to the Japanese government to release Asahara. However, Russian and Japanese security services caught them, and the terrorist attacks were prevented. It is worth adding that Aum Shinrikyo did not cease to exist. This sect was renamed Aleph. They continue their practice, although they have publicly renounced their terrorist views and have also apologized to the victims of terrorist acts. The leadership of this sect is still the same members who were not arrested by the court for the terrorist attack because they had not gathered sufficient evidence of their guilt. He is dead, but his religion lives on. If there are members of any sects among your acquaintances, tell me about it in the comments. I read them all, and besides, they are very helpful in promoting the video. So write at least something. And to continue the topic, I suggest you check out my other videos. The links will be right on the screen. It will be interesting. Be sure to subscribe and click on the bell. Bye!